In Chapter 6, Betty Edwards begins by recapping the 5 perceptual skills of drawing, which are 1. The perception of edges, 2. The perception of spaces, 3. The perception of relationships, 4. The perception of lights and shadows, and 5. The perception of the whole. This chapter focuses on the first skill, the perception of edges. An edge, in this context, is where two things come together, and the edge of an object is also the edge of the background. If you draw one, then you automatically have drawn the other. To get a better sense of what she means, Miss Edwards instructs us to do an exercise she calls pure contour drawing. Now, the idea with pure contour drawing is that you take an object, something like your hand, and you focus on it and focus on the minute details of it, and you draw those details as you see them. But the trick here is that you don't look at the paper as you're drawing. You keep your eyes focused on whatever it is you're drawing. So I have my left hand held off to the side, and I'm staring at my left hand, and I'm not looking at the paper at all as I start to make these marks down. And as you can see, when I'm making these marks, they don't really make any sense. They don't correspond to anything you would recognize in real life. But as I'm drawing this, I am completely turning off the left side of my brain where I'm labeling things as I go. I'm so engrossed in looking at each little line that's on my hand and not thinking about how it's translating to the paper that I really start to lose track with my left brain of what part of my hand I'm drawing. The parts of my hand that I'm drawing don't have particular names, or at least I don't know them, and so my left side of my brain shuts off a little bit. It sees that I'm looking at my hand, labels it as a hand, and as I continue to look, there's not much else for the left brain to do, and so the right brain is free to get more engrossed in each little contour and each little crack and line, and that's what Miss Edwards wants you to do. She wants you to focus on just what you're seeing without attaching any sort of left brain labels to it. So the final product that you end up with is a bit of a mess, but as Miss Edwards says in her book, no one in their left mind would do a drawing like that. Next, Miss Edwards talks about the concept of a picture plane, which is a powerful idea that is a bit difficult to describe in words. She explains that realistic drawing is the recreation of a three-dimensional object on a two-dimensional surface. The way to accurately capture 3 dimensions in this way is to imagine a pane of clear glass or plastic between you and the object you are drawing, as if you're looking through a window at the object. You then copy what you see on that pane of glass, your picture plane. Numerous accomplished artists have used a physical device to help them establish the picture plane for their drawings, and Miss Edwards instructs us to create such a device for our own use. I may make another video about how the picture plane is constructed. Eventually, she says, we move on from using a physical picture plane device and just imagine the picture plane in our minds as we draw. But for now, we will work on some exercises using the plastic and cardboard picture plane. And this actually comes with the exercise book if you buy that in addition to the regular instruction book. So she instructs us to just balance the picture plane on our fingertips and then just use an erasable pen or marker to trace what we see touching that picture plane. And so when I'm doing this, it looks a little bit off center because the camera is not exactly placed where my eyes are, but from my eyes perspective, this is just tracing exactly what I see through the picture plane and capturing some of the basic details like the outline of the hand and then some of the main lines going across the palm. So you lay it down and there you have a foreshortened view of your hand in a 3D perspective. And this is something that's typically pretty hard to do for beginning artists, but when you put the picture plane on there and just trace onto the picture plane, it seems almost ridiculously easy. It almost seems like cheating. She says to do this a couple of times just so you get the feel of it. So I went ahead and traced my hand in a different position, and then once you've got it traced, you take out the workbook and the next thing they tell you to do before you actually start drawing anything onto the paper, you need to set a ground. What you do is take a stick of compressed graphite and you rub it all over the paper that you intend to draw on. And it helps to first rub a piece of paper that's kind of just a piece of scratch paper so that you can get an even surface on the graphite rod, and get it so that it's nice and straight and it's not making sharp indentations on any of the corners of the rod. You take your paper you intend to draw on, you rub the graphite back and forth on it until you get it basically covered with a thin layer of this graphite. And then you take a paper towel or a cloth and you just rub it across that graphite to smooth out the surface as best you can. You want to just create an even, smooth surface of graphite, and then the point of that is that it makes it easier to erase marks, and it also sets a background that's not quite so stark white, so that you're already starting with some amount of shading that you can work with. Once you have that ground set, once your paper's toned, you're ready to start transferring the drawing that you took from the picture plane onto the paper. And you are just copying what you put onto that picture plane, and that's going to establish the outlines and the very basic details of the drawing. The drawing plane and the paper both have crosshairs that help you orient where different marks need to go in order to stay in proportion with one another. This is really helpful, at least I found it really helpful, because it's been difficult for me so far to figure out exactly where things need to be transferred from one vision to another when the images are of different sizes. So the tracing of my hand onto the picture plane, that's life size, but on the paper is a little bit larger, and so the actual drawing of my hand is a little bit larger. And you can see that I struggle a little bit with getting all the lines to meet up. I'll start on one side of the finger and go a certain direction, and then I come at it from another direction, and they don't quite meet up the first time. I read some comments from an artist recently who said that you see so many self-portraits and so many portraits or pictures of artists' hands and parts of their bodies because those are very convenient subjects that are always available, that are always willing to do what the artist needs done, and are flexible enough that they can have infinite variations on them. So I guess that's why you see so many pictures of people's hands and so many self-portraits. Those are always things that you can count on being available to practice with. Now, as I did this the first time, I was surprised that it went okay, but Miss Edwards suggests that you do it multiple times. So actually go through this exercise a couple of times. The second time, trying to focus more on the shading and then lightening. And the toned paper really helps with making the shading and lightening work. Next, Miss Edwards has you practice drawing your hand holding an object. And this was even more challenging, and I took a really long time to try and get this right. Despite the results being not that impressive, I actually spent a really long time trying to get all of the details of this packaging right. And having the lettering on there with all the different folds and bends, that was challenging because with a hand you can sort of fudge details a bit, but everybody knows what a Lifesaver's logo looks like, and so they can tell when you're not getting it right. But all in all, the picture plane really helps to produce a better result than I could get just by doing this freehand without the aid of any sort of tool. The next exercise is to try this again, but with something other than your hand. So I picked a flower on my way home, and starting with drawing some crosshairs, not doing any toning on the paper this time, just focusing on the outlines. I laid the paper down, used the picture plane again, and really relying on those crosshairs to get the basic proportions and orientation of everything on the paper right was helpful again. The crosshairs really help to keep everything spaced out correctly. I seem to want to compress the spaces between different parts of the drawing when I'm just doing it without any sort of guide. But I think the idea here is to try and get more comfortable with this method and get quicker about it and not agonize over the results so much. And again, the results are okay, but not exactly perfect. Now, the final exercise for this chapter is the same sort of thing, except for this time you're drawing an orange, a slightly peeled orange. And so again, you start with the crosshairs, and I didn't do any sort of preparing of the surface with the graphite. And in this exercise, I think I rushed a little bit too much. There was a lot of complexity here and a lot of shading and stuff that I didn't do, and the end result was probably the least pleasing of all of them. Also, I messed up a bit on not holding the picture plane at a consistent angle, and so everything got a little bit warped. I think this chapter does a great job of explaining how you perceive edges and how a picture plane can help you do that, and I found it really helpful. I hope you find this video somewhat helpful, and I appreciate you watching. Take care.